Welcome to Wild Talk. This episode is going to be exciting. It's going to be emotive. We're talking grizzly bears. We're joined by Clayton Lamb from British Columbia. We get into the science and the question everybody wants to know, is grizzly bear hunting sustainable? Next segment is one you're not going to want to miss. We're chatting with Jeremy Evans, grizzly bear attack survivor.
And this is where she took her first bite.
Stay tuned.
Wild Talk is brought to you by Trapper Gourds and Wild TV Plus.
All right, everybody, welcome to another exciting episode of Wild Talk. I'm your host, Steve Hamilton. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Kaylee Klassen. So, Kaylee, I want to know, how was the hunt?
Hunt was phenomenally successful. I got a bull down. It was surprisingly another non-typical, so I have yet to shoot a typical bull elk. My partner got an elk, a bull. He got his cow tag filled as well. We also managed to sneak in an antelope hunt, so my partner filled in his non-trophy antelope tag after an 11-year wait, which was super exciting. So all in all, we had a wonderful hunt. We still got whitetail coming up. I still got my mule deer draw down in Cypress Hills, so we are beyond excited. How was yours, Steve? What'd you get up to?
Oh man, we did a fly-in hunt in northern BC, and we were a day late going in, so that kind of set the tone right there. And we weren't expecting to get in even on the second day, and then all of a sudden the pilot showed up and he said, "Get in the plane." So we got in there, and that night the weather kind of started to blow up a little bit. And long story short, by day 3 or day 4, we'd already duct taped the only piece of standing dead that would fit in the tent to the pole because it was bent out of shape. The fly that was Teflon where the chimney for the stove came out was torn because the chimney was spinning so much. There was trenches we had to dig for water. We had to shore up each guy wire with 100 pounds of rock. And grizzly bear moved into the area on another hunter's kill. So it was a good time, and that actually kind of segues beautifully with today's topic, which is grizzly bears. I know it's a front of mind for all of us when we're in the backcountry, and I just saw it firsthand 3 weeks ago. We're hearing about them more and more and more as they seemingly enter urban areas. So today's guest is Clayton Lamb, who's a wildlife scientist and someone I'd consider an expert on grizzly bears. Clayton, welcome to Wild Talk.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get into a little bit about you. When I say you're an expert on grizzly bears, I don't say that lightly. From what I know and what I read on you, you are the grizzly bear guy, and that's why we've got you here. So let's get into a little bit about your background and how you got involved in grizzly bears.
Yeah, I mean, it started probably as a young guy out hunting. I mean, I bumped into grizzly bears as a kid growing up. I grew up in the lower mainland of British Columbia, but would kind of go into the interior and bump into bears as a fairly, not a very bear savvy person. And, eventually ended up doing a PhD on grizzly bear ecology across Western North America. And since then, I've collared almost 100 grizzly bears and followed them around and seen some of the kind of interesting and sometimes wild things that they do.
Yeah, they're iconic, and they're magical. They're just beautiful in all around. So I can see why you dug into them. So let's dive right into it. We hear and read it quite often about the impact humans have on wildlife. So what are the main impacts and drivers of grizzly bear mortality?
I mean, across the research that's been done across North America, it's overwhelmingly human caused. Humans end up being sort of the driver of more than 80 to 85% of grizzly bear mortality. So, kind of 8 out of every 10 grizzly bears is basically going to die at the hands of people. That often ends up being conflicts with people, collisions on highways, and some portion of that was hunting caused, but a lot of it's kind of conflict and those other sort of end fates across Canada.
you touched on something real briefly there that's kind of surprises me. When you say that grizzly bears are dying by vehicle collisions, that's not something you expect. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, it is still fairly rare compared to, say, the amount of deer or elk or moose that get hit just by a function of their abundance. But, in certain places, especially here in southeast British Columbia in the Kootenays, a number of grizzly bears actually get hit on the railway or on a highway. So collisions are, a dominant source of mortality. And, obviously it's a challenge for keeping bears alive when they're getting struck. So this is not a good news story for the bear, of course, that gets hit, but it's also a challenge for the people that hit them. That's a 300 to kind of 500-pound animal that you definitely don't want to strike with a car or even your pickup. That's a lose-lose for everybody involved.
Oh, absolutely. There was a great graphic that we'll put in the show here where it came out the other day, and it was talking about, I believe it was the Kootenays, about how bears are affected by these collisions. And as I said, that really was not something I expected to read or to hear. Is grizzlies being smacked by vehicles? You see deer on the side of the road. You see moose occasionally up here in Prince George, but I know firsthand in the last 3 months locally, I have dealt with a lot of black bears for people just as a volunteer, helping clean them out of their yard, because obviously they're getting smacked on the highways and then they're jumping fences and dying in their yard. And that seems to be something that has really, really changed the dynamic of what you expect from vehicle mortality. So I'd love to dig into this just a little bit more after the break. We're going to dig deep into grizzly bears with Clayton Lamb after some words from our sponsors. Welcome back to Wild Talk. I'm your host, Steve Hamilton, joined as always by Kaylee Klassen. We're having a great chat with Clayton Lamb about grizzly bears. We've talked about what the main drivers of mortality on bears are so far, and I want to keep going on this. So it seems that every couple of weeks or so we're hearing about grizzlies in the news, whether it's an area closure for grizzly sightings. You see signs everywhere posted that grizzlies sighted in the area, or even worse, grizzly attacks. And I know the other day there was 2 massive bears that were photographed in downtown Quesnel in a residential area on a parkway. I got sent these pictures. They ended up on the news. And I know personally I'm seeing a ton more, and in areas that I never used to. And when I do encounter them, they used to just turn and burn. They'd see your vehicle or they'd see you hiking and they would turn and just get out of there. And now they seem to be getting bolder. And I'm sure everybody read and saw the fatal attack in Alberta just a couple of weeks ago, where 2 campers were tragically lost in Banff area. So Clay, I'll throw it to you just like this. Are they losing a natural fear of humans in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, there must be something there in that, the bears that we see in, say, national parks where there's no hunting and they're not sort of shot in conflict situations as commonly as they are outside of national parks. I mean, those bears do seem to fundamentally behave a little bit differently. They also get sort of this individual attention, like every single bear gets warden attention, and a lot of work goes into keeping those bears alive. So they get a bit habituated to people. Whereas, outside of those national parks, sometimes it can be hard to see a grizzly bear in town. You see them in town, but following bears with collards, we often see that they're very nocturnal. They're really trying to avoid being seen. Doesn't mean they're avoiding going into town per se. They still are going to eat apple trees and cause trouble, but they are, they're not just standing on the side of the highway like they are in Banff kind of thing. And, so there must be something there. When it comes to risk to people though, there is, a dynamic that I don't totally understand, but we often worry about these bears in town and the bears that we see, right close to people. But those bears, as far as I know, rarely seem to attack people. Like, they're kind of habituated and they're kind of human savvy as well. And, it makes sense we don't want grizzly bears in our neighborhoods and at the playground. So I get that. But I mean, it's often these sort of backcountry, more wild bears that seem to do the attacks on people, you know, and like we saw in Banff, and we see that elsewhere, like hunters and things like that. Whereas people, you know, the interface between people and these kind of urban bears is like quite intense. Like there's the opportunity for a conflict or a mauling is obviously very high, but it rarely happens. So there's probably some optimum there where they're somewhat habituated or they kind of know about people, but aren't so bold that they're right in your face, you know, and that's obviously the balance that we kind of need to strike. But that's a fine line to walk with a 300 to 600 pound large carnivore.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on a great point there that a lot of people would seem to miss. And you said that these ones in towns, in interface areas, generally are a bit more habituated to people. And I've seen it personally, again, where I live. We're right on the edge of town. So we get a lot of black bears coming through the yard and down the street. And these black bears, they seem to know that it's garbage day. We got a bylaw here, you can't put your garbage out until 8 in the morning or whatever it is, the day of garbage, simply because of these bears. So they tend to give people a wide berth. And there was an attack, again, on a hunter a few years ago in the foothills of the Rockies down there. I don't know if you remember that case. The guy's name was Jeremy, and he ended up getting attacked twice by a sow, and he was hunting and drove his vehicle something like 16 or 18K. And he was, in his book, it's crazy. He's talking about holding his eye so he could see while he was driving. It's absolutely nuts. So, Kaylee, what are you seeing in Alberta when it comes to bears?
So in my encounter with grizzly bears, luckily I haven't had any in person. I've seen plenty driving along the highway stretch from Alberta to BC. None smucked on the road, but in my encounters in sheep hunting, we see the rooting everywhere. We see the fresh grizzly sign. We're walking along the same trail. We are in grizzly country, and I am always scared to death of an encounter face to face. It is eerie, and we see signs of them everywhere. Thankfully, it hasn't happened, but they are out there. And we are well aware. We go prepared with our bear spray.
Absolutely. It's almost like a sixth sense. As I touched on in the intro, we ended up having a grizzly bear move in on the carcass of a moose that was killed where we were on our hunt. And we never saw the bear after it had claimed the carcass, but we knew it was there. You could just feel that on the back of your neck stand up. And we gave it a wide berth. We didn't want to take that chance because that bear has more of a right to be there than we did. So we're going to get back into this conversation with more Wild Talk after this. And we are back with more Wild Talk. This week's topic is grizzly bears, and we're joined by Clayton Lamb, wildlife scientist, and we're getting into some fascinating conversations. Another topic I want to dig into is hot all over social media is relocation. Even amongst the staunchest conservationists, you hear tranquilize them, move them elsewhere. So I sit on the outside, and I'm not a scientist, but for somebody who is deeply involved in this type of thing as you are, Clayton, does relocation work?
Yeah, so I mean, it can. It's all sort of like compared to what, you know, it's better than probably leaving them there and causing, you know, all kinds of societal meltdown with a grizzly bear running through town. It is probably less effective than dealing with the root of those issues. You know, like we have these grizzly bear and black bear conflicts in towns across British Columbia and Canada every single year, you know? So at some point we got to kind of do a bit of navel gazing and think, well, why are these bears here? And how do we just not have this like repeated Groundhog Day of bear conflicts? And so, you know, that's kind of where our program always focuses on is how do we get rid of these attractants and sort of deal with the root cause? But in the meantime, yeah, I mean, some of these bears we want to relocate, especially like family groups or animals that aren't necessarily displaying aggressive behavior. They just happen to be in town, and it maybe seems a bit unethical to just kill them because they happen to walk into town or happen to be eating an apple tree that somebody didn't pick. But mileage definitely varies. Like, a lot of bears just come right back to where you started, and you can move them way and gone into the backcountry, but that then becomes a bit challenging for that bear, and that bear just shows up somewhere they don't know, and they can get kind of beat around by other bears, and some of them will just walk like 40 kilometers in one direction, end up in some other town, you know, or they'll end up in America, or it just becomes somebody else's problem. So, you know, the reality is that grizzly bears and bears as a whole they can be hard to rehabilitate once they get sort of a taste of being in town. They become sort of urban. And so, you know, it really reflects back on that. How do you keep these animals out of town? And how do you kind of make a landscape that will be a bit more resilient to, you know, having a landscape of carnivores, and one that we can also kind of share with them as well?
Totally. There was a video that we talked about briefly beforehand of three grizzly bears that were relocated from the town of Nelson in British Columbia, and now they're back. They're cruising those streets there looking for garbage and whatever. Do you know how far those bears were moved in the first place before they came back?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now in British Columbia, there's a policy of moving them less than 10 kilometers. And that was a purposeful choice, in that the goal was to sort of give the animal a bad experience, in that, like, they're captured, they're drugged, they're bounced around on a road in a culvert traffic. It's not a great time. And they're drugged to put a collar on them so we can follow them. And then they should be let go, though, somewhere that they're kind of familiar with, so they can make their own decision to sort of be a good bear, per se, and not go back to town. You know, whether that's the right move is sort of up for debate. I think one challenge is that we haven't done a lot of sort of relocation and relocation science in this province, where we're like, okay, let's figure out what the age and sex class is. Like, is this a young male, an old female? Do they have cubs? What's their condition? Like, how's this bear coming to this conflict? And then let's move them varying distances, or let's move them into good habitat somewhere else and kind of see how we can do this effectively, or which situations are just, they don't work. You know, like 9 times out of 10, this bear comes back regardless of what you do, and that's sort of a removal situation then. And then it goes back to looking into town to say, you know, folks, this doesn't work. Like, we need to start making this town work better for bears, because we can't solve these problems by just whipping bears out of here.
Exactly. And that leads me to my next question. So what can we do as conservationists and those that passionately care about species as a whole to mitigate encounters in urban areas where you wouldn't reasonably expect to deal with a grizzly, where they're coming into towns and stuff?
Yeah, you know, it all comes down to just making sure that those sort of food sources are secure. And, you know, hunters, for example, like, especially if you harvest something, you know, like, probably want it secured in your garage, you know, not necessarily just hanging in the carport, because that's a problem. Even in the middle of town, like, you gotta, even if you have a kind of urban buffer around you, you'd be amazed how far those animals can smell those kind of attractants. And especially when the neighbor on the edge has an apple tree that kind of brings the bear halfway in, and then it smells yours. Like, there's kind of these gateway attractants that they end up in the middle of town. So, you know, it's really thinking about how you basically remove those calories that are available to wildlife from your yard. You know, in a lot of cases, we want to build habitat and feed wildlife, and we want to do that in the backcountry and, like, get them as many calories so life's good for them, but we don't want to do that in our front yards, per se.
So we'll be right back with Clayton Lamb, continuing our chat on grizzly bears. All right, we are back, and we're continuing this amazing conversation with Clayton Lamb about grizzly bears. So we know in British Columbia the hunt was shut down in 2017, and grizzlies went from the most studied and funded animal. And we had 4 full-time grizzly biologists in government. We're now down to 1. Montana has 14. So we lost a ton of science and money from hunting and HCTF towards these animals. Alberta doesn't have a grizzly bear hunt either, and I believe at BC at last study had something like 13 to 15,000 estimated grizzlies. And Kaylee, you're in Alberta, so what are the numbers like that you know of there for grizzlies?
As of 2021, in the study that was done, there was just under 1,000, when before that, in 2010, they were considered a threatened species. So they have more than doubled. We have lots of grizzlies right now in Alberta.
Yes. So we're seeing quite the population uptake then.
Oh yeah.
So at the time of this episode, I know BC is engaging in an online consultation process about grizzly bear stewardship. It's been extended 3 times due to external pressures from anti-hunting organizations. So outside of the small businesses like outfitters, taxidermists, butchers, the trickle-down effect of the loss of this hunt, the management of them has suffered. We've seen organized campaigns to keep the hunt closed. And in BC, the data showed that we were taking less than 3% of a population every year that was shown to be sustainable at a level of 6%. So we weren't even taking half of what it could maintain. And as a hunter, I know personally, and I know you Kaylee as well, don't want to see extinction or extirpation.
Absolutely.
And hunters are the first to sound the alarm when something is not right in the backcountry. And it was hunters that brought chronic wasting disease to the attention of scientists back in the 60s in the States when they first saw it. They said something's wrong, and they started to study it. So this is the question, Clayton, that everybody that's watching this episode is waiting for. Is hunting them sustainable when it's done based in science?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when it's just sort of a question at the population level, like can a fairly large population of grizzly bears like British Columbia's be hunted? I think the answer is yes. You know, they are a species that can take some level of harvest. And, you know, obviously they were hunted for a number of years in British Columbia, and the population actually grew through a lot of that hunting pressure. So, you know, yeah, they can absolutely be hunted. There's legitimate conversations around, should they be? There's, other values that persist across the province based on different First Nations that, are not aligned with grizzly bear hunting, and First Nations that are aligned with it. And so there's it extends beyond just the can we do it? It's sort of the should we do it, and is it different in different regions? And I think that was something that was really missed in British Columbia, in that it is different in different places, and in different Indigenous peoples and the people of British Columbia have different values and perspectives towards grizzly bears across the province. The province is 1 million square kilometers. It's like multiple states in one place. And so no surprise, there are varying opinions and views towards wildlife and how people relate to landscapes.
Completely agree, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Once again, is talking about the different societal values that are being placed and on these animals, and as hunters, we recognize that this hunt isn't for everybody, and some people don't want deer hunted, they don't want ducks hunted. There's a social media post blowing up huge today. I don't know if you guys have seen it yet, but there's a guy that plays for the Toronto Blue Jays, and he took his son out and went snow goose hunting somewhere on the prairies, I believe it is, and it's blowing up, and it's throwing right back in his face because of that perceived, I guess we'll call it a trophy. And a lot of people are saying, well, you're not eating those. It's the same sort of argument we saw pushed back against the grizzly bear. Is there's a lot of myths around it. And I knew back in 2016 when we first saw that video, I'm sure you'd know it too, Clayton, of the people shooting the grizzly bear on the mountain slide half a dozen times, and the blood's pouring and they're hooting and hollering. I'm like, damn it, that is the absolute worst thing that could have ever been posted on social media, and we're in trouble here. So I completely get and understand your process there when it comes to saying that not everybody believes in this hunt. So I absolutely love the fact that you did say those key words there, when backed by science and when it's sustainable. Because, for example, lower mainland of BC, they don't have the populations there. They're extirpated. There's no hunts there. And there shouldn't be. In the north where I am here, in the Stikine area off in Region 6, they are everywhere. And some of the First Nations up here do fully agree with the hunt. And that's where we all are coming together to have great conversations, to say, you know what, we need to put wildlife first, and we need to back it based in these societal values and based in science. So, Clayton, I would absolutely love to have you on again in the future to chat more about grizzly bears. But yeah, just absolutely fascinating conversation. I'd like to thank you for your time, and we'll see you again.
Thank you, guys.
We're talking grizzly bears. We've already talked with Clayton Lamb and had some great information come from him from British Columbia. Now we've got a bit of an Alberta perspective. We've got Jeremy Evans on the show right now. He's got a crazy story to tell us. And I've heard this story before. I've read his book. And I just want to turn it over to him. So Jeremy, thanks for joining us. And let's hear your story.
Sounds good. Thanks, Steve. And thank you for having me on Wild Talk here. So back on August 24th, 2017, I was out sheep hunting in the remote wilderness of Alberta. It was up near Northburn Timber Creek, kind of where the water comes out of the rock. And I got up there the day before sheep season, and my goal was to go up there and find my ram and watch them, put them to bed that night, and the next morning harvest them and come on out and just do a quick little 4-day sheep hunt. So everything went well. I got out to the place where I usually park my truck about 2:30 in the morning. Hopped on my bicycle and my backpack and rode off into the mountains, way into the back on this trail. And I got to a little bit more of an opening, and I saw some rams, and I got really excited. So I took off my backpack and had it leaned against the frame of my bicycle. And I had just bent over, binoculars on. Looking with binoculars, elbows on the handlebars, and watching these rams. And I stood up to stretch for a second, and when I did that, I noticed a little brown thing run in front of me. And I was about 10 feet away, and I knew right away what it was. It was a grizzly bear cub. And I just got this overwhelming feeling of just being totally screwed, just being in the wrong spot at the wrong time. Because where was Mama? She had to be close. I heard a branch break over my right shoulder, and when I looked over my shoulder, there was Mama. She was less than 4 feet away, on a full charge. She had her right paw, arm stretched out, and I could see the whites of her eyes. Her mouth was slightly open. I grabbed my bicycle and just dropped it in front of her and took a step to the side. Her head went through the frame of the bicycle, and she picked her head up and looked at me, and the bike was around her neck, and she shook it off. I grabbed my backpack and was holding onto it by the frame, smashed her in the face with it. She got a hold of the backpack and started flopping it around, and then she managed to get a hold of my hand on the right side of the pack and crushed my right hand right against the pack frame. I managed to get my hand away, and then I started beating her over the head with my pack and just hitting her as hard as I could. She backed away and started to back away, so I started to back up, and I was trying to get my bear spray out of my backpack. And I remember, it was about 30 feet away, looking down, unzipping the pack, and when I looked up, she had turned around and she came running in, and this is what I call the beginning of round 2. I got about 60 or so meters away and jumped up into a tree. I got about 5.5, 6 feet off the ground. She stood up on her hind legs and wrapped her paws around my right leg. And seeing her bite around my leg, I just thinking this is going to hurt. And I was holding on for dear life, and she just ripped me out of the tree like nothing. Shook me like a rag doll and threw me 3-4 feet. And laying on my right side, and before I could take a breath, she was on top of me. And this is where she took her first bite. She grabbed me with her canine teeth, catching me on either side of the left eye in the corner of the nose. And when she clamped down, she removed the whole left side of my face. And as I'm laying there and she took that bite, I was just thinking to myself, well, this sucks playing dead. And she was coming down and her mouth was just at a perfect angle. I punched my left hand into her mouth. My thought was if I held her tongue, she wouldn't be able to bite me. Her back legs were digging into my right side, reached up in between the legs and grabbed at the time what I thought was balls. And with her head, I twisted and pulled and held on for dear life. She started to gag and squeal like a pig. I let go. She went running back the way she came. I got up and I dusted myself off and walked over to my backpack and picked it up and first thing I did was opened it up and pulled my cell phone out to take a picture of my face. I just wanted to see what I looked like. You can see the whole left side of my face is missing and chunks of my head. So I took the picture and I looked at it and I go, well, it's not too bad. I can go over there and shoot that sheep, or I can go look for this stupid bear. And so I'm sitting against this old rotten log, and I got my gun against my left shoulder, and I got the clip in my right hand, and I'm putting shells into the clip, and I heard a sound of ice breaking. The bear had come back, and this time she had grabbed me by the back of the head, and she was dragging me into the bush. The bear had come back, and this time she had grabbed me by the back of the head, and she was dragging me into the bush. Felt like she dragged me for quite a ways. She had reached over with her paw, caught me on the left corner of the mouth, and she peeled her paw all the way across my face diagonally, catching my right eye and peeling all the skin off my head. And then she was chewing on the left side of my head, just gnawing out like a dog on a bone. She removed all the skin all the way down to my collarbone. At this point in time, I couldn't see. My left eye was hanging out of the socket, hanging down. My right eye was smashed into my skull. I didn't think I had a right eye. I'm laying there, and I could tell something was above me. And I grabbed what I thought was balls again with both hands, twisted and pulled. And as I was holding on with both hands, I was trying to rip off. I wrapped my legs around her neck and locked them in. She started to buck like a bronco and was rolling around, flopping on the hillside. And she ran down the drainage, and I could just hear her all the way just squealing. After she left, I was feeling my face, and I couldn't feel my right eye, like it wasn't there. My left eye, I could pick it up and kind of move it around. In order to look forward, I had to hold it in my face, hold my hand. I ended up crawling down the mountainside, and I found the trail, and then I managed to find my pack and my gear. I was feeling around on the ground looking for my gun. I found that right away. And the first thing I picked up was a piece of my face. Was my mustache and goatee and my lips. I could tell when I was feeling it. You could feel the bristles of the hair and the smooth part. I picked up my phone and I sent a few messages to my wife to let her know that that was mauled by bear and that I tried to get out. Basically said my final goodbyes, and at least owed it to my wife and my daughter to try to make it somewhere where they'd find me. I texted my wife to let her know that I was just going to try to make it somewhere, and whoever found the body, just let my wife know that I tried. So I took the pieces of my face and then I tried to stand up, and I couldn't. All the ligaments in my right leg were severed at the knee, and every time I'd go to stand up, I'd fall over. I finally got to a point where I could stand up using my gun as a cane, and I would just shuffle my right leg forward and take a small step with my left. Well, the first 100 feet of the trail goes straight down the edge of the drainage, maybe 20 feet down the trail, and I lost my balance, and I tumbled head over heels about 200, 300 feet down into the bottom of the drainage. And I just remember laying there and just thinking, like, this is it. I had my phone out, and I was just going to play some music just to help calm things down. And the song that came on was the song that I played for my daughter the night before while putting her to bed, and it was Baby Shark. You know, that gave me enough strength just to roll over and to reach up for the first closest rock to me, and I just tried to pull myself up to that, and then reach for the next rock. And as I slowly was just setting those little mini goals, and as I achieved them, and after a little while, I managed to crawl up to the top of the drainage to the trail. And once I got to that, it was just, can I get to that next tree? My goal was just to make it to the main trail where somebody's going to find the body. I was a little over 12 kilometers from the truck at the time, and I managed to make it about halfway. When I got up to the fence, they have an electric fence around the place. I opened it up and walked in, and it was really, really quiet. And there was this big white cabinet, about a 4-foot white cabinet on a table there in the corner. So I tried to get it open, and I couldn't. So I ended up just knocking the cabinet over, and it broke open, and all these cans of food roll across the ground. And at this point in time, I was extremely exhausted and extremely tired. I had a roll of bounty sheets and toilet paper on the center of the table. So I grabbed that and I started just wrapping my face and head with it, holding up my jaw. And I was sitting there and I was thinking I should write a note to my wife to let her know, because I probably wouldn't wake up. So I got to the table, and there was a Sharpie there, and little sheets of paper. So I wrote a little note. Basically, the first part of it was a note to the outfitter to let him know that I'm sorry that I made a mess, and to let my wife know that I loved her, and I was sitting there and I was thinking I should write a note to my wife to let her know, because I probably wouldn't wake up, to let my wife know that I loved her, and that I tried. And when I wrote that, I set it on the table, and I fired the last 3 shots of my gun outside the tent, and then I was just sitting there, going to put the gun back on the table, and I was going to lay down and make a fire, and then I just figured, you know what, I'm going to try to walk out. Maybe they're on the trail coming in. Walking on the way back, I was hoping I'd run into them, but of course I never ran into anybody. It was just quiet. Near the end of the trail, there's a hill you got to climb up and over, and I remember getting to the base of the hill and just thinking, do I take the creek back and follow the creek back to the road and then hike back a kilometer or so, or do I just go up and over the hill? I was just thinking, like, if I went down the creek, I could probably make it, but then if I passed out along the way or dropped, no one would find me there. So I just remember the whole entire walk up the hill, just looking at my feet and just shuffling them along up the hill. Near the top of the hill, there's these 2 boulders, because I've always been too lazy to move off of the trail, and because every time I ride my bike down, I hit them and almost fall over. And so I've never been so happy before, because I knew from that point I was, less than a kilometer away from the truck, and I had 1 juice box left. So I sucked back that juice box and sat on top of the rock and gave the rock a little kiss. And then from there, I got to my truck, and the first thing I did is start it up. I remember looking out the front windshield, and I couldn't tell where the end of the hood was. And all I could see out in front of me was just dark green on either side and a light spot in the middle. And I figured the light spot was the middle of the road. I ended up driving about 22 kilometers to a little place called Panther River Resort. So I ended up driving my truck right down the trail, right up to the front of the lodge, and got out. And as I'm opening the door, and I hear this voice of a child saying, "Grandma, Grandma, someone's trying to play a prank." He thought I was a zombie, because I was walking all funny, and I had my shirt on my head, and I had all this toilet paper and bounty sheets, so it looked pretty bad. And of course I'm missing my face, and these 2 ladies are absolutely stunned. They don't know what to do, and I could somewhat talk at this point. I was mumbling, letting them know that I got mauled by a bear and who I was, and they were trying to call STARS or the ambulance, and STARS was unavailable to come out, and the ambulance couldn't figure out where we were. So there's a little bit of a panic going on. The ladies were running back and forth trying to give updates, and they didn't know what to do, and wanted to make sure I was doing all right. And this young lady was in the truck with me. She was just basically making sure that I was still okay. And I was asking like random questions, like, how old are you? What do you like to do? And the whole time I could just hear people running across the gravel, and I was telling the ladies that were running back and forth giving updates, and like, hey, just relax. I'm fine. I'm just missing my face. Like, you don't need to rush. I don't want anybody to get hurt, because I knew at this point in time my life was in their hands, and I wanted them to be able to make clear decisions. So I wanted to try to keep the mood calm. When one of the ladies came over there, she said, "Oh, there's a helicopter coming. It'll be here in about 30 minutes." I got out of my truck, and the lady that was at the door of the truck, she's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm going fishing. We got 30 minutes till the helicopter's here. There's a world-class bull trout stream 30 feet away. I'm going fishing." So I opened up the back door of my truck and tried to get all my fishing rod out. And she's like, "No, you got to get back in your truck." And this other lady, Amanda, comes out. She comes out and she's like yelling at me. She's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going fishing." And she's like, "No, you're not. You get back in your damn truck." And we guess we had a little bit of a standoff. And she took my rod away and threw it in the truck. And a little while later, a helicopter lands, and we go walking over there. It was a pretty fancy helicopter. And so I hop in there, and they close the door, and I haven't flew in the mountains in a long time, so I was pretty excited about the helicopter ride. And I kept leaning over to look out the window, and every time I would, I'd feel this really pinch in my side and really hurt. And I'd turn to look, and there'd be Amanda there. She's one of the ladies that worked at the lodge. She looked at me, and I turned to look at her. She pulled the tarp up. I'm like, "What are we playing, peekaboo here? Like, what's going on?" Well, what it was is when I was leaning over looking out the window, she thought I was passing out. So we landed in Sundre. And that's when things went crazy. So we landed in Sundre, and that's when things went crazy. And as I'm trying to get out, I just felt these two little arms come around me and around my chest and wrap around me and pulled me out the backside of the helicopter. And this little nurse grabbed me and threw me in a gurney and rolled me into the Sundre Hospital. And so they gave me a couple shots in the collarbone for infection, and then threw me in an ambulance and shipped me off to Calgary. And I had a paramedic right on my face, and what his job was to do was to suck out the blood out of my nose and mouth because I couldn't breathe. They were kind of worried on the drive on where to intubate me because I was breathing out of the middle of my forehead. They zipped me down to Calgary to the Foothills Hospital. They actually brought me through in the gurney right through the middle of the emergency room, where actually my family was all sitting there waiting for me. I asked if I could talk to my wife just one more time before they put me under, and they covered up my face, and she came in, and I told her what happened, that I was sorry, and I get there, and the doctor or the nurse, doctors and nurses like, hey, just relax, we got it from here, because I kept fighting them off, and I spent the last 12 hours fighting for my life, and now here I am. They're telling me to relax, and that's all I know is just to fight. So one doctor leans over, and she had my hand, and she leans over and she says, hey, I'm here, I'll hold you, I'll be here the whole step of the way. We did the x-rays, the CAT scans, she was always right there. When we pulled into the surgery room, she was there holding my hand, and this other doctor come over, female doctor, she had my left hand, and she comes over and they told me who they were, and they're like, this is what we're going to do, we're going to put you out and then do surgery. And so I'm pretty scared, and the surgery was about 13 hours. And from there it was a constant fight and battle. Every time I'd fall asleep, I'd wake up about 10-15 minutes later in a nightmare flashback of the bear was chewing on me, and they were quite violent, and I would just throw myself around. My wife was there and she didn't know what to do, and so she would massage my feet because that's the only thing that didn't have any bandages on, and the only thing that was exposed that she felt comfortable touching. Throughout the whole entire hospital stay, I had to have somebody with me there 24/7 just for the nightmares and flashbacks. And so I was in hospital a little over 5 weeks. All throughout the 5 weeks, I was getting psychiatric help for the nightmares and flashbacks, and also to be able to look at myself in the mirror. It took a lot of work, 2 therapists and my whole entire family, plus the bunch of the nurses there, to get me to the point where I could look at myself. The therapist had a little tiny hand mirror and held the mirror up, and it was up to me to have her come closer to see. I was quite surprised. It wasn't as bad as I thought. They sent me home, and from there I was doing lots of physio and lots of treatment for PTSD. Things were going really well for a while, and I was getting little to no nightmares or flashbacks, and then things got really bad. One day I got home from work early, and I was on the couch, and I fell asleep watching TV, and my wife and daughter get home, and my daughter's super excited. She sees my truck, and she comes in the house running, and she jumps on me. I go into immediate flashback. I end up throwing her across the room. My wife, she's trying to hold me back. I'm totally confused. Why are they there? Where's the bear? Daughter's crying, wife's crying, I'm bleeding. I don't know what's going on. That was one of the lowest parts of my life, because you never want to hurt your family. So we got into what was called auxiliary resolution therapy, or rapid eye movement. And I get in there, and the therapist gets really close to you, like really close. And she's like, I don't need to hear your story. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to wave my hand in front of your face, and I want you to think about your story. And of course, the first 5 minutes of this, I'm thinking, what the heck is this? Like, this is BS. So she's sitting there waving her hand in front of my face, and I'm just sitting like, this is a waste of time. But if I kept that attitude and that mentality, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. I completed the 45-minute session, and that was the first time in 3.5 years I was able to sleep 7.5 hours straight with no nightmares or flashbacks.
So for anybody saying, hey, I got a headache, I can't wake up this morning and go chase my deer in my spot at the end of the season, you got no excuses. So from Kaylee and I and the rest of us at Wild Talk, we'll see you next time.
Wild Talk is brought to you by Trapper Gourds and Wild TV Plus.